Thank you. That's the most important thing to say today. Thank you, church, for your support and your love for me, for my family, for the gift of this sabbatical over the months of May and June and July. We are very conscious that this is not a reality for many people to have this opportunity, and so it does not go without our deepest gratitude pouring forth from us. I also want to thank you for your continued participation in the worship and witness of our congregation over these months, participating with our theologians in residence, chaperoning youth trips, going on mission events, organizing fellowship outings, attending our musical concerts this summer. I spent Monday and Tuesday of this week trying to figure out where fires were raging to be extinguished that came up in my absence, and quickly found myself enveloped into the daily life and rhythms of the congregation, for there were no fires to be put out. And lastly, I want to tell you that in the last couple of weeks of our sabbatical time, I felt myself ready, energized, looking forward to being back among you all daily in the rhythms of life as a congregation together. It was exciting to come through the front doors on Monday morning to see familiar faces. I want you to know that I love you. My family loves you. So thank you, thank you, thank you, church, for this opportunity. Now, over these 3 months, while we were away, I've been looking at a lot of old things. Old mountains in Switzerland and old mountains in Montana, hearing old stories about the Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, learning more about old men, Karl Barth in Basel and Eugene Peterson on Flathead Lake. We went through old cathedrals and walked cobblestone streets in medieval towns along the Rhine River. And then we walked among old cedar trees and rock formations and drove across the windswept plains of South Dakota and Wyoming, ancient stories of the Blackfeet and the Lakota and the bison rising from the earth. It's a lot of time spent studying, exploring, and appreciating things that were old. And so perhaps it was that experience that keyed me in this week on the line in our scripture passage from Acts. Paul is standing before the Athenians talking about the resurrection, and he says, there's a line before he begins to speak that says, "Now all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new." Athens was a hub of learning. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Debates on great ideas were held in the Agora, which was covered in statues to the gods of the people. The Stoics and the Epicureans were two philosophies that were surrounding Paul during his time of his missionary journeys. The elites, the educated elites of Athens, they were always up on the newest ideas, the newest trends, the newest everything. They had updated their student manuals and they had updated their course guidebooks. They had spent more money on STEM education and expanded their majors to include more in gender, race, and culture studies. They were up on the latest in early childhood development and had adopted online learning and hybrid learning platforms. They use the Wit and Wisdom curriculum now in their classrooms because that was the latest technology. They were updating their standardized testing. They were always looking for the latest development in charter school education. These were the Athenians. They liked new ideas. And so when Paul shows up like a teacher at the first day of school ready for the in-service on the latest new idea for the classroom this year, he comes talking about the resurrection from the dead. That's a new idea to the Athenians, and so they want to hear more about it. It fits their culture and their norms, these new ideas. And so Paul opens his speech by talking about the statues that he has seen around Athens while he's been there. He commends the Athenians for the sense of transcendence that seems to rise up from within them. He says that he appreciates that God knowledge, and then he points to this particular statue that is labeled to an unknown God. And that's his entry point. But Paul doesn't say anything about the latest research. He doesn't say anything about the progress of humanity. He doesn't build upon the philosophies of the great Greek thinkers, though he borrows a phrase or two because he knows his audience. No, instead, Paul presents this new information about the resurrection of Jesus by going back to the most ancient claim that is the revelation of God to Paul's people, Israel. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He then goes on to expand on this notion how this God doesn't dwell in temples or in statues made by human hands and doesn't need promotion by a particular group of people in order to actually be God. This God is the source of our breath, the power in our speech, in our actions, the one who is at work among humanity in every time and every season. We are children of this God. And this revelation is made most clear in the resurrection of the one man, Jesus of Nazareth, from the dead, who has declared that this God who forms us is also a God who is for us, who is on our side, a God who is working for the wholeness of the world. We are enveloped in that God. Now, there is something new about what happens in Jesus' resurrection from the dead. It's not all old, but that new thing is that this love and power of God is now being made clear, that it is for all people, no strings attached. But it comes from the very oldest claim of Paul's people, that the one whose voice ordered the chaos, the one who spoke to Moses at the bush, who called David in from the field, who empowered Esther to rescue her people. This God is a God of justice and love, of loyalty and devotion, a God who makes things happen that no human being could conjure or create, a God beyond our reason, a God beyond our ability. And I think to trust in that kind of God is the greatest challenge for those of us who claim to be Christian people in the United States in 2022. We don't have a large forum where great ideas are debated. Don't try to convince me that's Twitter. We don't have a large forum where great ideas are debated, and it's surrounded by statues to various gods. Instead, what we have is news report after news report, year after year, that belief in God as a concept at all is plummeting among us. Paul, at least when he went to Athens, could point to a statue to an unknown God and use it as an object lesson. We don't even have that. Well, at least not overtly. Because just because the use of the word God and participation in religious communities is dwindling, that does not mean that human beings still don't have highest priorities, trust in some kind of power, and participate with acts of devotion and ritual to show the trust that they have in that priority. So what we've done in so many cases is we've replaced listening to sermons or Bible studies gathering around the scriptures with Instagram influencers or with YouTubers. We have something wrong in our life that we want to make better. Surely there's somebody I can follow online who's figured this out, who can tell me how to do it. So if your life goes askew, you go there to find that person's video, that person's tip, that person's life hack. And we even do things like spend our money to buy that person's book that's going to help me realize my potential in life. Or we subscribe to their podcast so that we can get to the content sooner and ad-free. We may not be in pews as frequently, singing hymns on Sundays, but just as many people as ever make sure they have that alumni donation in so that they can have their season tickets before the college football season starts. And they don't complain about how hard those aluminum benches are, and they can sing the fight song without needing any words before them. There's even a sacrament that we celebrate before the affair, the tailgate. And I don't know if this happens in Hokie land or not, but if you're in Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, people know the liturgical calendar, and you don't plan a wedding or a birthday party or a funeral when there's going to be a college football game. You know the dates, the third Saturday in October, the Egg Bowl, the oldest cocktail party in the South. You're not going to miss those. You know those better than you know about Advent and Epiphany and Baptism of the Lord Sunday. It's religious devotion. More and more, you see this all the time. We have conflated or maybe replaced our concept of God with our political affiliation, as though the ascension of this particular candidate for this particular role is the only hope we have to survive as a people, the only way that life will be brought to full fruition. We talk about it in apocalyptic language that would warrant the book of Revelation itself, and we condemn our opponents with the same vitriol as John of Patmos, with words equally as extreme as dragon and beast and the whore of Babylon. People are willing to fight for these beliefs, willing to die for these political beliefs. That's religious devotion. I also walk the neighborhood around here, and I've noticed something in recent years. Yard signs up when it's not campaign time. And one that's real popular that you see right now says something like, "In this house, we believe in science." It makes me think about the needlepoint that your grandma had in her foyer, and she called it her foyer. And it said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And that science is good and helpful, but you can't believe in it that same way because it changes as you discover new things. And just because you know stuff with science doesn't mean that it's being used for the benefit of humanity. It can also be used to destroy humanity. So you can't really say, we believe in science, like we say, we believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. And you see, all these gods and others, y'all could come up with them yourselves. These gods we have today are not that different than the gods of the Athenians. Now, the Athenians might have believed that their little statue god had some kind of magic power that could defy the natural law, but the only way to tap into that power was through the right behavior to the god, for the right sacrifices to be made. Think about giving your money, and hoping that that god is paying attention when you're making your sacrifice or behaving in the right way. You see, the pantheon of gods that the Greeks had, they were only tangentially interested in humanity. They were mostly interested in fighting with each other and using human beings as pawns in their great power struggle. You hear how that's not that different than subscribing to the influencer, trying to get the latest book or the latest podcast, or giving your money to the candidate, or hoping that if just my team will win the championship, then all my problems will be solved. We still do this. We still have this trust in these kinds of gods. And so the Athenians lived in this world like we do, of human effort and ingenuity. And the next new idea will surely get us to the utopia that we desire. So the challenge in our time, it may be the challenge of Christianity in every time, is to trust in a God other than us, a God beyond us, in a culture that is addicted to progress and ingenuity. It was over 30 years ago, sociologist Peter Berger wrote, "If anything characterizes modernity," that's the time we live in, "if anything characterizes modernity, it is a loss of faith in transcendence, in a reality that encompasses but surpasses our quotient affairs." The loss of transcendence, the loss of something beyond us that could do more than we could ever conjure or call forth out of ourselves. Churches can continue to fret about their decline in impact or relevance and assume that that could be changed if they would just adopt the latest technology or change the music or do something different with the messaging or become more of an activist group. We'll continue to insert ourselves into political debate and economic conversation and everything else. But that's not the ultimate challenge. The ultimate challenge is to be a people of transcendence, who hear the call of a God beyond us in the story of Jesus' resurrection from the dead, and we are claimed by that story, and so we shape our lives around it. It is to claim that we cannot save the world with our next great idea, but that only a power beyond us can save us, and indeed already has. It's to see more than what's in front of our face, to what is beyond us that is real in God. Now, just like Paul in the Areopagus, some will scoff at that concept. That is malarkey. Only what I see before me is real. Some will be intrigued because they're growing more and more weary with the other gods they've been giving their lives to who don't seem to bring the wholeness which they desire. And so they'll want to step another step. And a few, like Dionysus and Damaris in our story today, will hear the very word of life in this proclamation of Jesus Christ rising from the dead. And they will claim it as the foundation of their very being and courageously step out in faith to the way of love. My hope is that there might be a Dionysus or a Damaris who hears that word of life here today. Amen.